parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and you have 32 great-great-great-grandparents. That means if I were going to do a family tree that went back 5 generations, I would have to have a piece of paper wide enough to where at the top of that paper I'd be able to have 32 people's names, wouldn't I? Because that's how many ancestors I'm going to have directly in that 5th generation. Now, if I went to the 6th generation, my paper is going to have to be twice as wide because now I'm going to have 64 slots to put in names, right? Well, what happens, though, is that as we go back further, this number gets really big. Now, in order to understand how this chart works, we have to understand how long a generation is. How long is the average generation then?
Well, they say 20 to 25 years.
Okay. Now, a generation has nothing to do with lifespan. For example, my mother was 30 years old when she gave birth to me, and women generally give birth between the ages of 20 and 40. So let's just take 30 as an average. 30 is a nice round number, and 30 is a very conservative number for this calculation. So a generation is 30 years, meaning somebody has a child when they're 30, and then they have a child when they're 30, they have a child when they're 30. Nothing to do with lifespan. So that means that if we go back 10 generations, then that's 300 years, right? So let's just round off and say that if we went back in our family tree about 10 generations, we're going to be at about the year 1700. Now, because our family tree is getting wider, if we wanted to do a complete family tree showing all of our ancestors back to the 10th generation, we would have to have a piece of paper that was wide enough to have 1,024 slots. Because 10 generations ago, there would be 1,024 people that we would directly descend from. Now, here's what I noticed when I did my family tree, though. When I went back 10 generations, you know what I started noticing? These are no longer unique people because there had been some intermarriage in that 300 years that had unknowingly taken place. Let's go back 20 generations. So now we're back around the year 1400. Well, if I wanted to have a complete family tree, I would have to have a piece of paper that could fit 1,048,576 names. That's a pretty big piece of paper. So in the year 1400, if I'm going to trace all of my ancestors, I'm going to tell you who all of my ancestors from the 1400s are, I would have to show you a family tree that just at the top would have 1 million some people, just in the top row, let alone everything else coming downward, right? If I were to go back 30 generations, now I'm only in the year 1100. I'm not even close to the time of Christ yet, am I? No. If I went back to the year 1100, 30 generations, I would have 1,073,741,824 ancestors in that generation. Now, listen, they're not all unique. When I did my genealogy, I found this relative that she was my 10th great-grandmother on this side and my 11th great-grandmother over here, because people marry their 5th and 6th cousin without knowing it, obviously. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of repeating going on, right? You know what that shows? That a lot of people are descending from the same people. Cannot help but intermarry. It's impossible not to because of these numbers. Now, but look, the real number that we want to go back to is not 1100 AD. Let's go back to 70 AD, because 70 AD is when all the Jews were scattered. Now, when you say scattered all over the world, do you mean that in the most literal sense? I mean, all nations?
Yes, in the most literal sense.
If we were to go back to 70 AD, and we were to have a family tree that shows all of our ancestors in 70 AD and how they're connected, that top line would have 18 quintillion, 446 quadrillion, 744 trillion names from 70 AD. Now, who thinks that there were 18 quintillion, 446 quadrillion, 744 trillion people living at the time of Christ or shortly thereafter? No. In fact, the approximate population at that time was 200 million. Of that 200 million, let's just call 7 or 8 million Jews. You say, I don't like that number. Well, that number's not going to matter in a minute. Okay, so let's just call it 8 million. Okay? So if there are 200 million people on the earth at the time of the temple being destroyed. And about 7 or 8 million of them are Jews. That means if I have an ancestor from that era, there's a 1 in 27 chance that they were of Israel. So think about this. What if I were buying a lottery ticket, and the odds of that lottery ticket coming up a winner are 1 in 27? Because that's the winning ticket that says, you're Jewish, you're of the chosen people, you are of Israel, you are an Israelite indeed. I've got a 1 in 27 chance. You say, well, Pastor Anderson, if you have a 1 in 27 chance, you're probably not going to win that lottery because you got 26 chances of losing. Okay, but what if I buy 18 quintillion lottery tickets? You think I'm going to win? Let me ask this. How many times do I have to hit it to be descended from Abraham? How many times do I have to hit it to be descended from Israel? You say, well, I'm black. I'm of Africa. How can I be connected with Abraham? Well, stop and think about it. Think about Israel's children. You know what? One of Israel's children, Joseph, guess where his wife was from? Egypt. Joseph's wife was of Egypt. Where's Egypt? Africa. Moses' wife was Ethiopian. His second wife was Ethiopian. So we already see, even in Bible days, intermingling with Africa, intermingling with the sons of Ham. I mean, if you think about it, the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh were half of Ham and half of Israel. Because Israel's son, Joseph, married an Egyptian woman who's of Ham. So all of the Ephraimites and Manassites are descended of Ham. And not only that, but all throughout history, you've had all kinds of merchants and missionaries and conquerors. Even, you think of the Mongolian Empire that went all over the world and that conquered China, that conquered Japan, that conquered Korea. All the ships that sailed and went here and there and everywhere. You only have to have one ancestor. Out of your millions and millions of ancestors, you only have to have one that descends from Israel. And you are a direct descendant of Israel today. You sit there and say, oh, I'm just purely a white person. Oh, I'm just purely Asian. I'm just purely African. No, you're not. No one is.
People have been marrying and intermarrying for thousands of years. So you can't have any pure population.
You know what? The Bible was right when it said we're all of one blood.
Even populations that we think that has got to be 100%, they're not 100%.
And that
there
was
is
rare.
no 100%.
So you can sit there and have your endless genealogy. It won't even be accurate. Because you know what you can't tell from a genealogy? Somebody who committed adultery and lied to their husband and said, oh yeah, this is your son. And he's not. People do their genealogy and they kind of just take everything as gospel, when in reality, there could be, as you euphemistically call them, non-paternity events.
There's a non-paternity index, which has been estimated at 0.05% per generation. So if you go back 20 generations, you're likely to have a non-paternity event. That's the soft way of saying it. And if you consider that a generation is 20 to 25 years, that means in 500 years, you're due in that line to have a non-paternity event.
Every 500 years.
Yeah. In one line.
So on one line.
In one line. How many lines do you have? Right.
So really, if somebody traces their genealogy, they couldn't really say, hey, I know for a fact, I know the whole story because I'm looking at this genealogy. Because the DNA test is going to reveal more.
Well, DNA doesn't lie. And people lie. DNA doesn't lie.
Right. So people could say, hey, I'm Jewish, or I'm not Jewish.
Exactly.
But the DNA...
Right. A DNA doesn't have an agenda. People have an agenda. People have reasons to lie. And also they might just not know the truth, which is possible as well.
So it's not even that they're lying, it's just that they're mistaken.
They're just passing on mistaken information.
1 out of 15 Americans is adopted or has a parent that was adopted. That's a pretty high number too, isn't it?
I mean, who can tell you all the people in your lineage that were adopted? Oh yeah, my ancestors 300 years ago were adopted. You're not going to remember that. So there are adoptions, there's infidelity, there's traveling, there's conquest, there's merchants, there are missionaries.
Different people have different things they wanted to hide.
Right.
And so they only tell you what they want you to hear.
It doesn't matter where you're from, folks. You know why God said to avoid this? Because it hurts your mind to even think about this. No. I mean, these numbers bend the mind. He's just like, just avoid it. Just avoid endless. You know what? They minister questions. I mean, does this make you feel really sure about your nationality now? No, it raises a lot of questions. So what do you think about somebody going down to the DNA lab, getting their DNA tested, and it comes back and says, oh, you have these Jewish ancestors? I mean,
I have no quarrel with them.
Would you accept that if it?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Because it's so possible, because they were so scattered, right?
Yeah, I would never argue with it.
Mm-hmm. The director of this film, Paul Wittenberger, and I are just a couple of white guys. We've never been told that we're Jewish or have any Jewish ancestors, but we're going to go down and get our DNA tested and just find out if we do.
We match your DNA profile against over 400 population groups worldwide, and we present you with a top 50. And for ancestral DNA, we don't have to get thumbprints. It's not a legal document.
Right.
So that's all we need is the swab and the name. So these will go out tonight. We should get results back in about 3 to 4 weeks.
A few weeks later, Paul and I got our results back, and just like they said, we were a mixture of a whole bunch of different nationalities. We had everything from Arab to Brazilian, Native American, and there were a lot of things on there that were a big surprise. And sure enough, when we looked at our deep ancestry, which goes back further than the top 50, we both had markers for Jewish DNA. So I figured I'd get my grandma's DNA tested to see if Jewish made it into her top 50. We tested my grandma. She's 94 years old. And we wanted to swab her, while she's still with us.
Oh, yes. That's very important.
Yeah, so we got it. All right, grandma's results are in. Let's check them out. All right, let's see her top 50 first of all. Number 1, Ashkenazi Jew. Number 1.
No way.
So that explains why it was in my deep ancestry, because it's her number 1 of her 50 nationalities. And her number 1 result was Hungarian Ashkenazi Jew. So her number 1 result was Ashkenazi Jewish.
Wow. Well, with DNA consultants, we've done this for many, many years. I haven't seen that very often, to let you know. And every report, like I'm saying, is unique. People are like, oh, it's probably very general. No, everybody's very unique. I don't know when I've seen number 1 Ashkenazi, so that is...
Really?
No.
Cool, yeah.
Maybe 3 or 5 times.
So let me ask you this.
That is very rare.
So if grandma's DNA had number 1 Ashkenazi, is there any doubt that she's an Ashkenazi Jew?
No.
And if she's my grandmother, what does that make me?
You're Jewish.
So I'm Jewish.
You don't have to accept the religion.
Right, but ethnically speaking.
Ethnically, you are. Whether you, whatever you want to do with it.
So hold on.
I've now pronounced you Jewish.
Is that really what it all boils down to? Good night. That's DNA? Are you kidding me? What about Jesus? What about faith in Christ? How in the world can God's people be determined by DNA?
Look, it doesn't matter what our genealogy says. It doesn't matter what our DNA results are. None of that is even important. The only thing that really matters is that we are a child of God through faith in Jesus Christ.
And I found so much proof that Israel there is not the Israel that God's talking about. But we who have believed in God, who have the faith of Abraham, we're the children of God. We're the seed of Abraham.
It says in Romans 9, verse 7, neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they all children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called. That is, they which are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God. But the children of the promise are counted for the seed. So the Bible says that the children of the flesh, the physical children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob,